Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about Arizona's water challenges. Probably not too hard to imagine that Arizona's got water challenges. We live in a desert. So, but we're hearing reports about hot droughts and mega droughts. Maybe a good time to take a look at exactly what's going on. There's maybe even some things we can do about it. So I'm going to share my screen here. And probably the first thing we should do when we talk about Arizona's water challenges is look at where we get our water to begin with. Now, about 2% of it is effluent or wastewater. 40% of it is groundwater, and another almost 40% of it comes from the Colorado River. We have a surprising amount of surface water. There's some rivers, particularly in the center of Arizona, a little bit to the north, the Little Colorado, the Agua Fria, the Salt, the Verde. But this Colorado River is the one that impacts us in southern Arizona the most. And when we're thinking about it, it's important to take a look at this is what's called the Colorado River Basin. It includes the Four Corners states, Wyoming, Nevada, California. There's an upper basin and a lower basin. Now, this graph that comes from the Arizona Department of Water Resources, ADWR, says that we get 2,800,000 acre feet per year. That's our allotment. That unfortunately was wishful thinking. This was said in the 1920s. The study period was an unusually wet period for the Colorado River Basin. And so all these numbers were exaggerated compared to what we've actually seen as the discharge rate. And yeah, they spelled acre wrong all the way through on this gorgeous little graph. Our total central Arizona or CAP allocation for 2021 is about 1.4 million acre feet. Now, Central Arizona project just really impacts, there's a little bit of it in Prescott, but it really impacts Phoenix area, Tucson, and points along the Colorado River Canal. Now, in a business as usual carbon emissions society, you can see what's happening. You saw this area, including and maybe especially including the Colorado River Basin. This is looking at the projection for soil moisture going forward. It finishes off here at 2095, but you can see that there is a serious problem brewing for this area due to, well, here we are. This was a 2013 report on the assessment of climate change in the southwestern United States, prepared for the National Climate Assessment. Their findings in a business as usual, there it is again, if we don't cut carbon emissions, warming will continue with longer and hotter heat waves in the summer. We're now reading a lot of stuff that says, and summers will be 6 months long. Winter cold snaps will become less frequent, but not necessarily less severe. In other words, we could have a Texas-style cold spell. Late season snowpack will continue to decrease, and importantly, the droughts will become hotter, more severe, and more frequent, resulting in water deficits in excess of those in the last 110 years. Now, this report, I would just want to remember to mention Greg Garvin with the U of A, one of the lead authors. Some of you may have heard him speak. He's talked in Green Valley and surrounding communities quite a bit since the report came out. But there was a new report that just came out a year ago. This was from Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, and they said a mega drought is bad or worse than anything even from known prehistory is probably already in progress, and that climate change is playing a key role. If we pull, there's a place called the Drought Monitor. You can go pull these maps off. So I pulled this one off on March 2nd. And you can see now that a big chunk of the Colorado River Basin is in exceptional drought, and almost all of it is an extreme drought. Now, I know that we just recently had some snowpack up in the in the upper basin. And so it'll be interesting to see how that impacts it. But the most recent things I have seen as a result of this doesn't give us a whole lot of hope that this is going to significantly change. This was 84% at the time of this map. 84% of the upper basin was an extreme to exceptional drought, and there are 54 million people living in these areas. Now, there was another report that came out in December of 2020 by the Bureau of Reclamation, and they expressed some concerns, talked about some of the reasons we should be concerned. One of the things that's important to think about is that the Colorado River reservoirs, that would be Lake Powell and Lake Mead, are only at 46% capacity because of the long-term drought. And when we say long-term, we're talking at least 21 years here. This goes from 2000 to January of 2021. And you can see anything that's a color is an indication of some level of drought. And you can see that we've had 21 years of drought in this upper Colorado River Basin. Here's another kind of a cool graph, and it requires a little bit of explanation because it's not your normal graph. So this one year across the bottom, starts in October, ends the end of September across the bottom here. Up the side is the percent saturation of the soil. And then over here, all the years from, it looks like 2006 up to 2021. And each year is given a color depending on whether it was an unusually wet year or an unusually dry year. And you put all those colors together, and this is the map you get. This is the wet here. May 1st is the somewhere around, and there's the peak of soil moisture saturation. But here's where it's worrisome. So this is depth average soil saturation. Now this is the state of Utah. Here's where it's worrisome. This is 2021. Actually starts in October of 2020, but you can see it doesn't even get on the chart with the rest of these. The article that this came from said, it doesn't matter if we get an incredible snowpack. Our soils are so depleted right now that it's not going to really translate to water coming down through the river systems. It's also worth knowing that Utah, I believe, is one of the 4 states that also get Colorado River water, and they're saying that CAP keeps too much for Arizona. Now, they can whine all they want. We've signed a compact in 2019, but so this was 2007 rather, is when we signed the compact. They went into effect in 2019, but the guidelines are described as interim because they only extend through 2026. So in just 5 years, we will be writing those revised water laws, and Arizona may find itself challenged for the amount of water that it gets. So let's take a little closer look at this CAP water. For one thing, it's divided into pools with different priority levels. That's important to remember. And the first one right on top for a reason is called excess. Non-Indian agriculture is number 2. And then both of these are 3, M&I, municipal and industrial, and tribal. In fact, if there are shortages, these 2 are the last to feel the effects. The first to go is excess, and then this non-Indian agriculture. Now, over here is our kind of usage. So 36% is at M&I, and 28% is tribal. So more than half of CAP water goes to those 2 sources. We'll talk in a minute about why I don't think much is going to change to the contributions to Lake Mead. That's what trips cuts as Lake Mead's level falls. It triggers the cuts to what we're going to get. So here's this 15% is this agricultural pool, and 4% for others. Now, There was a study published in August of 2020. It was a 2-year-long study. And what they are taking a closer look at is the levels in Lake Mead. Now, if we are already on tier 0 at 1090, but the lake level as of January 21st, 2021 was 1085. We go to tier 1, 1075, and you can see there's more tiers here, but we are now at 40% of capacity in Lake Mead. So let's take a look at those tiers a little bit more closely. Tier 1 is triggered if it falls below 1075, we lose 320,000 acre feet. It drops 25 feet more, we lose 400, and it gets down to 1,025 feet, and we lose nearly 500,000 acre feet. So that's kind of the challenge for us. Now, there's one more white paper that's come out just recently. This was February of this year, 2021. This is the Center for Colorado River Studies. And they took a look at, the alternative management paradigms. And what they said was the Colorado River Basin, the lower river basin states, that would be Arizona, have to slash their take from the river by up to 40% by the 2050s in order to keep the reservoirs from falling too low. 40%, that throws that 400,000 acre feet out the window. Such a cut would amount to about twice as much as the 3 lower basin states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, agreed to absorb in 2019. So we have got a significant threat due to long-term drought to the CAP allocation, specifically for Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties. Now, there's some good news. Let's talk for this about, now, 1980 water law established these active management areas. There's the Phoenix AMA, there's the Tucson AMA. This is in Pinal County, it's actually an INA. It's a non-irrigation, non-expansion for irrigation. I don't know, somehow that works. So you can't have any more irrigated land than you've already got. There's one down here. Prescott's got an AMA. Santa Cruz County is also an AMA. So the goal is to achieve safe yield by 2025. And the way they did that was, first of all, they put in a law that says developers have to prove 100-year supply. Now, 100 years, you can argue if that's long enough, but that's what they did, okay? They put excess water into Lakes Mead and Lake Powell, just kind of keep some extra water on hand in the event of a drought, and then reuse water. So they improved water treatment plants, and they reuse the water in things like cooling nuclear reactors. And also a lot of this water from the treatment plants is going back to recharge the aquifer. It's put in recharge basins. So that's a good thing. Also, they worked on conservation. Block rates water pricing. Your first block, is enough to take showers and cook with and drink, but the next rate up, the one that you're going to water outside with, that's more expensive. Promoted rainwater harvesting, paid homeowners to rip out the lawns. They gave incentives for irrigation. There was some exchange of excess water, and they had to settle some tribal water claims. That's why tribal is one of the last to be touched, because they frankly had prior rights. And it seemed to be working. So this was the trajectory of groundwater use up until 1980. And you can see that after that law passed, boy, it just went right back down, even though the population growth in the state was pretty steady from the 50s all the way up to 2015 when this was made. So good news there. So what the heck is this about? Arizona's water system for suburban growth heads for a train wreck? According to Bruce Babbitt, he was the governor when that 1980 water law was passed. He went on to become Secretary of the Interior. We want to hear what he has to say, but holy smokes, Arizona will struggle to find enough water for suburban growth? What the heck is all this about? Especially since they've got Quail Creek and Green Valley on that same page with that headline. Oh my goodness. Well, there's some more information that we can look at as we try to figure this out. We go back to this assessment of climate change in the southwestern US, that report that Greg Garfin had something to do with. And that report said a near doubling of population from 2000 to 2050 will increase already stressed water resources. And I pulled this off of the governor's website. Maricopa County, this was about a year ago, Maricopa County, Arizona population growth was ranked #1 in the United States, and we can see it going on all over. There are new developments springing up and new people moving in. This is a fact of life in the desert Southwest. Well, so we're trying to understand why there should be this panic, and we have to talk about one more water law. It was passed in 1993. There were some shenanigans by some of the big developers, but this who didn't want to abide by the 100-year water supply rule. So this is called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, or CAGRD. I'm going to call them KGARD, just because the other is such a mouthful. This is what's really important. Certificates of assured water. All KGARD requires a certificate of assured water. Now, this is only in Pima, Pinal, Maricopa counties. So what the law says, it allows pumping groundwater for new subdivisions whose developers don't have access to renewable supplies. They don't have CAP water, maybe a little river coming at them. They can't make the 100-year water supply. So what they can do is they can pay someplace else to buy and recharge renewable water supplies, not right underneath their development. What could possibly go wrong, right? This is 2018. I just want to take a look at this real quick. This was a report given to Sahuarita Town Council. Remember, this is 2018. We have the benefit of 3 extra years of knowing what happened, but they amazingly got quite a bit of it right. Drought does not immediately equate with water shortage. That's true. This is a slow process. We are not running out of water, not today. Colorado River system is 40% of Arizona's total water use. Yep, drought conditions for the past now 21 years. Lake Mead dropping to historically low reservoir levels. Yep. Shortage within the next few years. We're probably already there. Expected shortage is small compared to Arizona's total Colorado River allocation. Well, this was 2018. They did not have that 2020 study that we have now seen that warned that the lower river basin states, including Arizona, may have to slash their take from the river up to 40% by the 2050s. The 2050s is not tomorrow, but 40% isn't going to happen. They're projecting until the 2050s, but we need to act now in order to prevent this from happening. They also went on to say, I kind of like this little report. They went on to say that 5 main providers, one is designated, that's the community water of Green Valley. It gets designated M&I's CAP water. And then 4 require certificates of assured water. They've got 5 listed here. I looked them all up. Sahuarita Village Water just is a mailbox. So these 4 probably, the other 4 are probably the ones they're talking about. They all had robust websites, or maybe Sahuarita Village Water's gotten one now too. I don't really know, but they remind us about this assured water supply, this 100 years, that especially the ones that require certificates. Now, here's why this becomes important. This is the Central Arizona Project line. It doesn't get all the way to Green Valley and just gets at the northern boundary of Sarita. So this is Pima Mine Road. Now, this was the last slide I'm going to show you of that Sarita Council, but they did a good job here. Okay, so what they basically said is Sarita currently doesn't use CAP water, but this was 3 years ago. I think now they do. Community Water Company holds an allocation for CAP and is developing Project We News, which will provide recharge basins to store water in the aquifer. FICO is another one. So what we've got is we've got pipelines now that bring the water from Pima Mine Road much closer in to the community of Green Valley and kind of closer into the heart of Sarita. There's one from the community water and one from FICO bringing that into our area. So that's a good deal. It's also worth noting here that the master plan for the pecan orchards is to turn them into homes within the next 50 years, and 50% less water is used by houses than used by pecan orchards. So that's another thing that kind of eases our mind a little bit here. Green Valley Water Reclamation Facility, municipal treatment plant, takes the water that comes out of their treatment plant and recharges it into the aquifer. This is common practice in an AMA, so that's another good piece of news. We can all kind of rest easily, can't we? Sarita Green Valley used groundwater that's now being recharged by CAP water. It's also being recharged by treated sewage water. It makes these nice little retention basins that are home for wildlife. All good, right? Well, maybe not. There's still the certificates of assured water and the K-Guard that we need to think about. There was a report, this was fall of 2019, saying this was called the elusive concept of an assured water supply. They had several findings. Enrollment in K-Guard has grown far beyond expectations. Remember the Ducey slide. K-Guard will struggle to acquire sufficient water supplies for replenishment. Originally they thought no problem. There's excess CAP water. We'll just give it to the K-Guard, no problem. But enrollment radically outpaced this supply. At the same time, the entities that had long-term CAP contracts started using more and more of their rights. So there wasn't an excess from them either. So more people wanting it, a lot less excess available. And now we add shortages of Colorado River water due to drought. Suddenly, if you're in a K-Guard, there's a bit more of a worry. Pumping groundwater from great depths poses grave consequence. Yes, the aquifer goes down quite a ways, but the top is good sweet water. As you get further down, it will require more and more treatment to make it safe for human consumption. The disconnect between the location of pumping and the location of replenishment is problematic. If we're pumping for domestic use in the area of, say, east of Quail Creek, but we're recharging it north of the city of Green Valley, that may not be good enough to keep. Things happen, subsidence happens if you take water out of the ground and don't replace it. So here's another one. K-Guard's financial model is at risk. The assessment rate for Greater Phoenix area, for example, went from $154 per acre foot to $727 per acre foot. That is gonna about ×4 your water bill. Big surprise there. K-Guard's consultants have warned of a potential financial catastrophe. And sure enough, This was January 3rd, 2021 in the paper in New York Times. Wall Street eyes billions in the Colorado's water. The headline said investor interest in the river could redefine century-old rules for who controls one of the most valuable economic resources in the US. Private investors want to bring in or amplify futures markets and millisecond trading, precipitously raise the price of water. Now, if you're a K-guard, you're having to buy water on the open market. And we saw in Texas what having to buy on the open market because people need it now can do to the price of a utility. Exploit volatility due to drought. There we are, failing infrastructure and government restrictions. And they're going to prioritize municipalities and conservation over agriculture. Maybe paying farmers not to farm. That could actually be a good thing. I'm not surprised they're going to prioritize municipalities. That's where they can precipitously raise the water prices. But I'm glad to see conservation is in here. And maybe paying agriculture not to farm some of these real high alfalfa and cotton maybe shouldn't be someplace where we're in a water short area. Now, some more from this last report, just quickly. The K-guard, the way the law was written, they can't turn anybody away. New renewable supplies are hard to find. We've talked about that. Groundwater depletion is exacerbated. And member homeowners pay an open tab. So in addition to CAP allocations, now we've got threats to groundwater supplies due to population growth and weak laws, and our laws can't protect us from opportunists. But we're not done. That's just the first challenge or set of challenges. So when I first started looking into this, I was looking at these active management areas and all their success and going, that's a pretty small part of the state. I wonder where the wells in the state actually are. Does that cover most of them? So I pulled up this registry of wells in Arizona and it was like, holy smokes, that was shocking. So this is not a very big part of this. So we're going to take, so I started doing a little more digging and we're going to take a look at La Paz, Mojave County, then down here in Cochise County. Google won't let me play this whole video and it probably takes too long anyway, but there was a nice little piece on Fox, water concerns in La Paz County because Middle Eastern farm companies are growing alfalfa. And it turns out what's happening is some wells are going dry in the neighborhood of these farms. These big farms from the Middle East moved in, buy up thousands of acres, they grow alfalfa, 12 months out of the year because they can pump groundwater to do it and they've got the right temperatures, it never freezes. And then they bale it and ship it back to the Middle East for their own cattle there. This was not making the farmers and the just general residents who had wells in the area that had gone dry very happy at all. Now, we've got the same kind of problem up in Mojave County. This was New York Times Magazine, the Water Wars of Arizona. They said, attracted by lax regulation, industrial agriculture has descended on a remote valley, depleting its aquifer, leaving many residents with no water at all. Here was another one from Western Water. Because of the state's lax regulation, the companies can operate in secret and they don't disclose their plans or the amount of water they're using to the county or the state. They are not in an active management area. They do not have to. Little kind of background on this, just because it's interesting. So in 2002, there was a Las Vegas real estate developer who bought up a bunch of land for, he was going to do developments. And then we had the big economic meltdown in 2008. So a couple of years later, he shifts to the large scale alfalfa farming and starts to turn over some of that land. Well, Stockton Hill Farms follows. It's owned by a UAE-based conglomerate. They're the #1 exporter of feed and forage products to markets in Asia and the Middle East. We've seen that somewhere before. That was exactly La Paz County. Also, some California nut growers have moved in because California's got stringent water laws that they didn't want to have to deal with. And then finally, East Coast hedge fund investors purchased land in the area for agricultural purposes. No, they didn't. It's not for agricultural purposes. We now know as of January 2021, they want to trade in the water futures. So there are kind of legislative implications here. Mojave County leaders have asked the state to help safeguard these declining groundwater supplies, but the law currently forbids legislators from looking at any water that might be taken out of the ground by these big agricultural companies in the future. They can't look at next year or 10 years down the line from these large existing large scale wells. Even if they established a new irrigation non-expansion area, they can't limit the pumping because the well was already there. So legally, there's not much future. We're going to move over now. This was a Channel 4 news to the Wilcox Basin. You've heard this story before. Okay, so there's been 20 dry wells go dry since 2008, and water usage versus natural recharge since that time, there has been water usage. Now, this is acre feet is the way it's measured. So you can think of a 1 square acre, a foot deep in water. Well, it would go up 32 miles high if you count all the pumping, and recharge the amounts put back in from, these retention basins or rivers or runoff or snowpack has only been 7 miles high. They've got a problem. But according to Sharon Megdal, director of Water Resources Research Center at the U of A, no matter what people think, it's completely legal. And she says, some people feel like if you start metering things, they'll become regulated. There are folks that don't want to see the water regulated. I mean, this is true about that. So what she suggests, instead of advocating for state law to change, she suggests more people focus on what they can control, their own consumption. Now that makes sense in Tucson. Okay, if you could get everybody in Tucson to shave 19% of their 1/5 of their water use off, that would be pretty significant. Right now, who uses Tucson water, it's mostly single family homes and a little bit of multifamily. If you could just carve off a chunk of that, it would make a big difference. This is Green Valley's water use, though. Agriculture and mining take the almost, well, what does that look like? Maybe 70%. That doesn't leave to, then you've got golf courses. So this is the little bit that municipal use is. Pretty hard to have your own consumption make enough of a difference to qualify. This was from a USBR report that was done, I think, in 2017, and this is what they looked at as our supply. CAP water here is about 1/4 of our supply, and remember that's threatened by 2050. We could lose almost half of that. And then renewable groundwater is this little slice right here, and the rest of it starts looking kind of icky. Treated effluent, impaired water, this black bit, they hadn't even figured that out yet. They're just kind of hoping they could find something, I guess. Water management and conservation, so cutting down on current use. Wow, that doesn't look too good. So that's where some of our concerns should be coming from. Now, I'm an Arizona girl. I grew up in Page, went to school in Flagstaff, went to school in Tucson. So I know that the economic 5 C's of Arizona are citrus, cattle, cotton, climate, and copper. And copper is a bit of a problem. I know you've got the Rosemont mine, if you're in the Green Valley area, that's been a big worry. And they were just given a little boost by Waters of the US law that we're not going to go into today, but is worth kind of looking into if you haven't read about it. But what I do want to talk about, you're aware of the Rosemont mine and the challenges to the groundwater levels from Rosemont. But as you move into Santa Cruz County in the Patagonia Mountains, there are a number of different mining companies that want to pull ore out of the ground. And in order to do this, they need to use an enormous amount of water. Now, the problem, this one is the one that's active right now. This is South 32, an Australian company. The materials they mine will go overseas. Sound familiar? But they've got a problem. The ore is actually underneath the groundwater and they can't get it out unless they get rid of the groundwater. So their plan is to pump, they call it dewatering. They're going to pump about 1 billion gallons a year of groundwater from the Patagonia Mountains aquifer. And frankly, we're all in this same aquifer. And just put it out on the ground so that they can uncover the ore. Now, this water took millions of years to get there. We will not be able to recharge it. They take that out. Our recharge, especially in hot drought conditions, is not going to happen. And unfortunately, the water comes, the top is where it actually comes from. So this whole area will eventually have groundwater levels too low to support the trees who, this is a biological diversity hotspot. The Sierra Madre biome is just one of the 5 top areas in the world for biodiversity. To lose the trees and the surface water will kill it. Now, we talked a little bit about legal, and we've talked a little bit about Arizona laws. This is kind of an example of just how fragile it all is. Remember that 100-year water supply? Well, a developer came into the Sierra Vista area. The development is not called Pueblo del Sol. That is the name of the water company. The development is actually called Tribute, but this is down in the Sierra Vista area. They wanted to do 2,000 acres, 7,000 homes in this area, but they couldn't prove a 100-year water supply. And Arizona sided with the developer in the water use dispute. But they weren't. So remember these names, Gail Griffin and Rusty Bowers. Their name is on. They continue to have bills trying to overturn these 100-year water supply requirements. Any place that overpumps groundwater will lose surface water. And the San Pedro, even more than the Santa Cruz, is absolutely critical for that biodiversity hotspot I told you about. Now, it seems like Gail Griffin should not be, it's conflict of interest. She is a real estate broker in the Sierra Vista area from 1975 to the present. So it just seems like conflict of interest for her to be working so hard on these laws protecting developers, but I guess it's legal. There's another one of these going in near Basin, another 28,000 homes, 70,000 people. They're going to call it Vigneto, which means vineyard in Italian. Publicity suggests it's soon going to look like Tuscany here. So this is Tuscany. This is what it currently looks like. In order to go to this, they're going to have to pump a lot of groundwater. And the rainfall in Tuscany is 35 inches. It's 14 inches, and less than half of that in Basin. So they are going to have to keep pumping groundwater to maintain anything green. And that brings us back to the San Pedro River. You can see it right here, the Sierra Madre Occidental. This is migratory flyway for birds. It is home to all kinds of wildlife species. The San Pedro River will dry up with this kind of pumping and will eventually lose the trees there as well. So that final one, lax out-of-date water laws outside the AMAs and INAs invite exploitation and hurt existing residents and the environment. Well, there we go. So we still have choices. I've presented this as business as usual scenario for the hot mega drought in particular. Under climate change, this is kind of my go-to graphic that reminds me of what we all need to do, resilience in the face of the changes that are going to happen, even if we work on it. Adaptation is organizing to live with the impacts resulting from climate change imposed challenge. So what we need to do now is strengthen Arizona's water law and enforce the 100-year water supply. Mitigation just slows the rate at which climate change is happening. Well, the best way I've seen this described is, in order to get to net zero by 2050, we need to get the easiest 50% of our CO2 emissions eliminated by 2030. It's going to be the next 50% again of what's left by 2040. Those are challenging. And that last bit between 2040 and 2050 are going to be the hardest nuts to crack, but we have a smaller number of them and we're all kind of moving in the right direction by then. So I want to take just 2 minutes, well, maybe 4 minutes, and just kind of bring this into the context of the rest of the world. The US is only decades away from water shortages, scientists warn. This was in March of 2019. Here we go. This is at the current rate of groundwater depletion. 35% of the southern high plains will be unable to support irrigation by 2040. That's just 20 years away. This is the Oglala Aquifer. You can read all about it. This goes, I know, Amarillo, Texas, and then north is Oglala Aquifer. It's happening not just in the US, but it's happening around the world. This is New South Wales, Australia, harbinger of things to come. Farmers in Australia struggle with its hottest drought ever. We remember the wildfires that came as a result of it. Indian cities running out of water. 600 million people dependent on agriculture have already been adversely affected by drought conditions across great swaths of India. Growing water crisis in the global south. Water scarcity already affects more than 40% of the world's population. In Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, they're already using available water as fast as they can. They're pumping it as fast as they can. And one of the problems with some of these places is that as sea levels rise and as they pump near the ocean, that pumping leaves room for seawater to start to intrude into the aquifer. So now they've got infertile soil because of all the salt moving into their groundwater. And when they pump, it just brings all that salt right up. Now, there are some bills that we can take that I hope you all take a quick look at. There's an Engel, Rodriguez, and D'Alessandro bill, one in the Senate and one in the House, that says we need to consider watershed health, the trees, the surface water that support the environment that we depend on when we are planning groundwater pumping permits. This so far has been neglected. This is very much support this bill. I'm seeing Cano on Cano, a nice young man. I think he was just elected in 2018, and a lot of water bills come out with his name on them recently. Now, he proposed this HB 2203 that would prohibit new wells and new well permits in the Upper San Pedro groundwater basin and the Verde Valley groundwater sub-basin. This is to help protect some of those surface flows. It didn't even get out of committee. I checked on it just before this. I recorded this. And this was a Pratt and Shope bill about the assured water supply. And they basically, it's kind of hard to understand what they're doing here, but it basically sounds kind of good, but it doesn't address changes in the active management area that relates to drought, over-allocated water supplies, the need to conserve water, and it facilitates more unsustainable development. So HB 2336 and SB 1274, those are not good ones. Pratt and Shope. Here's another Canyo bill, irrigation non-expansion areas. He wanted to give some procedures for those to include future demand. Now, we talked about this. Remember, current non-expansion areas can't include the future demand of existing wells. So he has a fix for that, HB 226 and HB 2595. And then we support that. And HB 2208, adequate water supply. This prohibits a city or town from approving a subdivision outside of an AMA unless there's an adequate water supply. This puts some teeth into the law. So we recommend you support that. So those are all state bills. This Waters of the US, this was that Clean Water Act. Regulations for ephemeral streams were really loosened last year. So there are some things, waters of the state of Arizona that are undergoing some consideration, and they're fluid at the moment. So that's just something you need to check on. So what can we do to survive a hot mega drought with adequate water supplies? As you have your conversations, and I hope you're watching this with somebody else, consider agribusiness. What about these water intensive crops? What about families displaced by overpumping? And are you worried by the fact that most of these agribusinesses that are doing this are coming in from outside of the state because we have lax water laws? Another thing we talked about that's worth discussing is mining. Don't know what we can do about it, but there must be something worth talking about. We talked about population growth, these replenishment districts, the K-Guard, and the fact that you all are on, if you're in one, you're on the hook for whatever it's going to cost to get you those water supplies. And then of course there are the hedge fund investors. I thought this was a pretty good cartoon. Now that was a drought. I wonder if they have any advice for us. The plants are dying, the trees are dying, the animals are dying, the sun is hot, people are thirsty. Maybe we need to come up with our own advice. So I think that's the last slide. I can't seem to get it to go any further. So thank you very much. Hope you have an enjoyable discussion, and we'll see you back for the next one. Bye now.